Hello and welcome to the NewWorldReview, your source for everything anime and manga, and today we are here for some more Jujutsu Kaisen madness, this time to delve into the prequel series, which is a truly fascinating look at what spawned this world and the original ideas that Akutami had with it. Although what makes it much more interesting is that I believe it's all canon as well, which does definitely raise, a few questions. One of which is, have you subscribed to the NewWorldReview? If not, then look. I'm not saying that my special grade vengeful curse is going to activate and deliver you a swift cursey punishment, but just to be safe, let's press the button anyway, as it will result in regular injections of Jujutsu Kaisen content administered straight into your YouTube feed. But to continue on with the prequel, I actually shouldn't call it a prequel because having looked into things after reading this, it turns out that this was the OG Jujutsu Kaisen published in Jump Giga, and it was just intended to be a 4-chapter short story that got wildly popular and spawned the sequel, which we now all know and love. At least I'm assuming we all know and love it. I guess if you're watching this video, chances are you're more on the love side of the scale. But as a result, after finishing it, I've been tossing up over whether or not I should have read this first because chronologically, this is how people would have first experienced Jujutsu Kaisen, and a lot of people went into the series with this prequel story in mind. That's a question I'll be tackling throughout this video because the thing about Jujutsu Kaisen 0 is that it does retread a lot of the same beats as the sequel series. So the general premise is that we have YUTA Okotsu, and he is scheduled to be executed for housing a big bad Curso. His execution is delayed. He then gets enrolled in Jujutsu High, meets a series of fun first-year friends, gets mentored by a certain Gojo, and has a mission to sort out this curse business. And while there are many different contextual reasons for this setup, it does mirror Yuji's beginnings quite a bit, which I do like looking at it in retrospect at this stage after experiencing Yuji's journey, whereas it may have felt a bit repetitive if I'd started with 0 and then went straight into the actual series with a very similar setup. I mean, maybe not, that's just the feeling I get. That is the last Yuji comparison I'll be making though, because in regards to Yuta, he is a very different character, almost completely on the other end of the spectrum, being meek, weak, and with very little belief in himself whatsoever, at least to start with. And that does make him quite relatable because whilst the brave and strong characters are fun to live through vicariously, if most people found themselves embroiled in this cursed world, they would probably be far more Yuta-like in nature. And I did very much enjoy his story, the tragedy of Rika being killed and then being manifested as an insane curse being due to a promise, and Akutami is very, very clever with how that information was dished out, first portraying it as if Rika's feelings caused this phenomena, when in reality it was that naughty Yuta. And I also think this is the first time that we've properly focused on love as a source of negative energy, rather than the more straightforward things like, oh, you bullied me, or you destroyed my environment, or even you killed my mother and then you killed me sort of stuff. But in terms of love, it's almost the opposite to the curse equation that we explored in Gojo'S past with the whole negative times negative equals positive, whereas love can be twisted in such a way that it's positive times positive equals negative. And I'm well aware that that doesn't fit into mathematical sense because positive times positive is still going to end up as a positive, but you know what? Love doesn't care about maths, and neither do I. As soon as I saw that word promise though, it immediately made me think of binding vows, and if this situation was sort of like a precursor to that idea. Two people who have made this agreement together in life and need to fulfill it through death. And yeah, it didn't quite turn out that way, but it did still retain that flavor of be careful with promises in this world because they can be very, very meaningful. So what I'm still trying to come to terms with is the fact that Yuta was immediately classified as a special grade dude thing, which initially you think is because of Rika, but by the end of the series it becomes apparent that no, this is just how stupidly insanely powerful Yuta is. A name that was mentioned, I have it written down here, is Michizane Sugawara, one of Japan's big 3 vengeful spirits. So I guess that's an explanation, and it is a nice little piece of world expansion. Although in addition to that, we also have some solid numbers thrown our way. I think we may have heard this before, but there are only 4 known special grade Jujutsu sorcerers, which I guess are Gojo, Geto, Yuki, and now Yuta. But much more interestingly, Jujutsu Kaisen 0 also gives us a solid number of special grade cursed spirits, being 16. And this is one of those question-raising features because I imagine that this is one of those ideas that would have been scrapped for the sequel series, considering just how absurdly commonly we seem to stumble across special grade spirits. Although come to think of it, maybe I'm wrong because they do tend to be labeled mostly as like unregistered special grades. So the continuity probably still works there, but it still seems like an abandoned idea. As for the guy who said that, let's talk about Geto because he is by far the most jarring thing about the prequel. Probably the best reason I would give for not reading 0 first is because I would not have wanted this to be my first experience experience of Geto. In these 4 chapters, he is incredibly undercooked as an antagonist. He's missing a lot of his subtlety and comes off as just an evil bad guy for the sake of having an evil bad guy. Even right down to the way he's drawn, he's given these very classically maniacally evil expressions, and his dialogue is also pretty generic. Which, to be fair, in a story consisting of only 4 chapters, there just isn't enough room to flesh him out. What we need is a big threat, and he serves that technical purpose well enough, I suppose. But it really did make me miss the Geto I know from Jujutsu Kaisen, and I appreciate the work that Akutami has put into enhancing that character, adding elements of understanding, empathy, and intrigue. Although there is a bit of a problem here at the end of the prequel, which is why didn't Gojo either kill or capture Geto? He was done, injured beyond belief, on the floor, completely at the mercy of Gojo, and I suppose if you do look at this story in isolation, you could infer that Gojo did do one of those aforementioned things. And look, I'm not going to linger on it too much because I also need to keep in mind that Geto's story is not finished, and this may have an easy explanation in the future. Akutami doesn't seem like the kind of author to let this narrative hole slide, especially in a world that he tries to paint with as much realism as possible, which it can be tricky when the premise of said world has to do with supernatural curse powers. Speaking of Gojo though, he's another character who I'm very glad I experienced first in Jujutsu Kaisen. In the prequel, he has a lot of his trademark quirks, they're there in theory. It's just that they aren't expressed as potently as Akutami would go on to do. Like, Gojo does still feel aloof and interesting, but not quite captivating, and I think a lot of that comes down purely to art. A lot of the time Gojo, and I suppose everyone really, is drawn in a very basic pose in the prequel, and this is going to sound incredibly minor, but one thing that is really neglected with Gojo specifically is his hands. Like, seriously, in Jujutsu Kaisen, Gojo's hands are like half of his character. Akutami puts a ton of effort into Gojo's body language, especially the hands, and that's why I believe he comes across with such clarity, because something crazy like 55% of communication is purely visual, and that is very important in the manga medium because we don't have access to the remaining 45% of verbal communication due to the fact that we can't really hear the tone of the characters. I guess our imagination does kind of fill it in, but that's not something the author can control as well as body language. And yeah, I'm starting to go on a bit of a tangent here, but what I'm trying to say is that between this prequel and Jujutsu Kaisen, Akutami pretty seriously leveled up as an artist, and most of it has to do with very minor little details like this. Another example would be that curses in Jujutsu Kaisen 0 tend to be far less detailed and grotesque. They very much actually blend into the world as presented. Whereas in the sequel series, these curses are often so bizarrely detailed that they pop out at you as something that should not exist with everything else around it, which is great because that's the entire idea behind them, being these unnatural aberrations and all that. With the second year students, or I guess first year students here, they were very nice to see in a more primary focus, but a lot of it is going over information that we already know because it needed to be restated in Jujutsu Kaisen. So we have the same story unraveling Maki, a showcase of Inumaki, and actually Panda, he even has the exact same introduction where he is just referred to as Panda, with no explanation whatsoever, just like Fushiguro did, which is pretty funny. I do enjoy me some Panda. And actually, this is probably one of the stronger points for reading Zero first, because I think it would probably be better to feel out these guys alongside Yuta and then expand upon them in Jujutsu Kaisen, rather than going from that expanded knowledge of the second year students to this very basic portrayal in the prequel. And funnily enough, there is a nice hint of Todo within Panda, who adopts the trademark ask about which girls you like, or in this case, which boobs you like, which I suppose was toned down and then incorporated into Todo. I'll also say that I did still really like Maki during these chapters. She was a very good counter to Yuta, as she is effectively powerless but super strong and a supremely driven existence, and that juxtaposed against Yuta's endlessly powerful but weak and heavily unresolved existence was just pretty great contrast. And also, I'm never going to argue with Maki doing cool Maki things, so sure, please do provide. Now, what I do wonder about this prequel is, because it does hit a lot of the same beats, does it kind of give away the end of Jujutsu Kaisen? I'm one of those people who's very much in the camp that I would prefer Yuji to die in the end, having completed his mission with a whole ton of people around him, like his grandfather stipulated, as opposed to, say, ridding himself of Sukuna and living happily ever after. In this prequel, we have a hint of the latter, with Yuta figuring out the Rika curse, and I guess going on to live as normal of a life as a Jujutsu sorcerer can from here on out. I mean, without the curse, his execution probably would have been cancelled, and the more we go into Jujutsu Kaisen, the more I feel like that could end up being Yuji's path as well, which at this stage I still don't want, because the series started out so boldly with this whole "you're going to die, there's no way out of this," and Yuji just accepting that, so I guess we'll see. Another thing I should say is that I was told to read the prequel very specifically at this point in the series, which I can only assume means that the information within it is going to be important for the very next arc, which I imagine means that Yuta is going to appear, because other than him, not a whole lot really happened here that we're not aware of in the series as it stands after Hidden Inventory. Or well, actually, I suppose that Gojo'S family could also be important. His whole gang of sorcerific peeps, two of which were the little girls from his flashback, which was a nice tie-in. But YUTA and those characters aside, I don't think anything majorly important happens that we didn't already know, so I'm bracing myself for the return of our former protagonist and wondering how his sorcery has evolved without the use of Rika. Although my biggest question mark actually comes from the idea that this prequel series is being made into a Jujutsu Kaisen movie, which seems like quite a brilliant move. There's just enough material in here to make a satisfying feature, and given that it is effectively an isolated story, you could feasibly walk into it without having seen or read Jujutsu Kaisen itself. I am curious to see what changes they will make though, specifically maybe to characters like Geto and Gojo, because this is one of those situations where crafting a faithful adaptation to the source material probably won't actually do those characters justice, because they've both just evolved so much since this short series. But as for the ultimate question of when you should read the prequel, this might just be my bias because this is the way I did it, but I don't think it's ideal to start with. It's a fun series of chapters to look back on with a greater context of what Jujutsu Kaisen has become. I just think that Akutami does such a superior job of introducing the world and its characters in the sequel series, so starting at that high is what I would prefer the first experience to be. But that pretty much does it for this blind review of Jujutsu Kaisen 0, and what do you guys think? Please do leave your thoughts in the comments below or even join my Discord server, and if you're keen for some more Jujutsu sorcery, then please do check out my other videos or even subscribe to the channel for very maybe regular Jujutsu Kaisen morbidity delivered straight into your YouTube feed. But for now, this has been the New World Review, and I'll see you next time.